Namaskar. Hello, dear participants. This is Vijay Kulkarni. I'm the host for today's webinar on Integraal. We are glad to have more than 200 registration, and the registrations are not only from research and development, but even from quality assurance and regulatory departments. On behalf of STEERLife, I welcome all the participants who have joined this webinar. Today's webinar focuses on introduction of the novel twin screw granulation technology, and the speaker will be discussing on the following key points. First, he will discuss about novel fractional lobe elements. Second, he will discuss about all-in-one versatile granulator for wet, melt, and moisture activated granulation. Finally, he would be discussing on features, capabilities, advantages, and applications of Integraal, the twin screw granulator. Before we move ahead, let me introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Dr. Babu Padmanabhan, who is the Managing Director of STEER Group. He has done his PhD in mechanical engineering from Virginia State University, USA. He has made significant contribution in the field of twin screw processing technology. More specifically, he was been involved in designing the fractional lobe elements, which is a game changer in the twin screw processing technology. I'd also like to give a brief about how the session is going to be flowing about. We have the presentation by Dr. Babu, which will be for 45 minutes. During the session, we will be having 3 polling questions appearing on your screen. Therefore, we request all the participants to please provide their inputs for the polling questions. Also, please note that the polling questions is time limited. It will be appearing on your screen for 30 seconds. So we request all the participants to please provide your inputs. Finally, after completion of the talk by Dr. Babu, we would be having a question and answer session. Therefore, I request all the participants to please submit your questions anytime during the session. I emphasize anytime during the session. To submit your questions, you need to click the Q&A link, which is there at the bottom of your screen. The question and answer session would be there for 15 minutes. If required, we can extend for 5 more minutes, considering the number of questions what we get. So this is about our today's session. Now, I would request Dr. Babu to present today's topic.
Vijay, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I start this session with a deep sense of gratitude. You know, we have, as a society, as humanity, seen a lot of change. A lot of things have happened due to the COVID situation. One approaches every day with a sense of gratitude for all the work that is being done towards restoring some kind of normalcy in the world as we have known it. At the same spirit, I'm also deeply grateful that as an inventor of a technology, as an inventor of a processor, it's certainly a feeling of gratitude to know that the industry is willing to use it, is willing to adopt it. So I feel very privileged to be in the midst of you today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen through this webinar on introduction to the novel twin screw granulator, the Integraal, which is capable in one single step, capable of processing and producing wet and melt granules by combining the processes of granulation, drying, and sizing if it's wet, granulating, cooling, and sizing if it's melt granules. Let's get started. I'd like to share a quote, a very interesting quote from the Handbook of Pharmaceutical Granulation Technology, which goes as follows: do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. This is an invitation. STEERLife is inviting you to be trailblazers. We are certainly looking forward to working with each of you and creating this path, creating a new trail with each of you. And that is the excitement, that is the opportunity with which we start this presentation today. As you can see from the screen, this, and as Vijay did explain or state, this presentation is expected to take roughly 45 minutes. There will be a brief introduction of about 5 minutes about STEERLife, and we will at that time focus on our commitment to advance pharmaceutical manufacture and development. I will take another 10 minutes after that to present the fractional low processor and introduce some concepts on the science of continuous processing. We'll move on further from there to the granulator itself, the all-in-one granulator, which can, in one way, do wet granulation, and another do melt granulation. So what are the functions, operations of this novel granulator? And of course, most importantly, we will discuss, what is this capable of achieving for you, for your business, for your institution, for your organization in terms of growth, profitability, and improved operational stability. Jumping into, therefore, the brief introduction. So the group, STEER, founded in 1993, 25 years now, works on a field called solid-state fusion. Fusion involves getting material together in a way that enhances its properties. So the interaction with these materials then results in newer materials. When it's done in the absence of solvent, so when materials are combined in the absence of solvent, we would call it solid-state fusion. As a company, we specialize in this nature of material technology, material science, in the fields of pharmaceutical, life sciences, food, also polymers and other advanced materials. And I will be introducing to you the fractional lobe technology that we deploy as a continuous manufacturing system that allows great many sensitive materials such as APIs to be processed in mission critical application. Our journey as STEER Group into the pharmaceutical world, and we are very grateful for this opportunity, happened when one of India's large ARV manufacturers who was doing the PEPFAR program approached us for a hot melt extrusion system. And today we are happy to note that over 50% of the antiretroviral drugs used for second-line therapy, the Caletra generic, is prepared using the STEER-based technology. Going further, like to also state perhaps something that may be in the public domain, because it was in the news for quite some time, that STEER worked with GSK on revolutionizing Horlicks manufacture. So we did participate over a period of time, and this was an amazing experience working with a food product, and that too a complex manufacturing involving gelatinization, hydrolysis of starch. With that background, I'd like to take you through how STEERLife as a company evolved. So starting from 2009, as we saw, the first extruder gets sold for the pharmaceutical field in HME. And then Evonik soon asked us to make a very small extruder for PLGA processing to make implants. And then we get noticed, Dr. Sen comes in contact with us and willing to chair our pharmaceutical development center. And then the entire program blossoms. Deepak Chattaraj is on board. Indibushan comes in to manage and head the entire development program. And from there on, we could start building this program together, filing patents, creating platforms, and so forth. And today, in 2020, after having launched our first effervescent product in the market last year, we are happy to have a milestone moment. We have the factory acceptance of our first commercial Integraal gamma. With that behind, we believe that it's time, having spent years and years developing this and meticulously getting it tested, offer it to the industry at large. So STEERLife as a program contains a few elements. It has the element of drug development with proprietary platforms. I'm not going to go into great detail. You would hear Indu and others talk about this in future during other webinars devoted to drug development. But the first series of webinars that STEERLife would do would be on manufacturing solutions. But we just want to park this in your mind. STEERLife as a company is into drug development, whether it's effervescent technology, whether it's doing some differentiated drug products, or especially in solubilization enhancement. These are key areas of focus for STEERLife as a group, and we have some unique technologies to offer there to work with you. But today, as you can see, the yellow highlighted box is where the focus would be. STEER Engineering and STEERLife work together to get manufacturing solutions in the pharmaceutical space across to you. And these various development centers therefore combine force to ensure that these solutions that we offer are industry tested, compliant, and so forth. So how do we do this? Again, over the years, we have built quite a bit of experience, track record in HME equipment. HME is an equipment that, as we all know, does complete fusion. It combines materials to create a soluble or an amorphous drug sometimes, and a dispersion some other times. But these kinds of large HME installations are what STEER has provided based on our existing abilities, fusion abilities, complete fusion abilities to take API and an excipient and process it together. Now, these kinds of programs have been done in R&D scale with a number of players, at pilot scale, and as well as I shared earlier, 50% of Caletra generic is made using STEER equipment. So commercial scale for class 2, class 4 drugs all around the world is being done. So this is the background in terms of equipment related thing. And extruder is a very different animal, a different equipment compared to a granulator. A granulator is a partially fusing equipment. So here at this particular time, I'm happy to share with you what it means to have a processor that is capable of doing granulation as a process rather than extrusion as a process. So I present today to you the novel technology that will enable these continuous granulation process. The backdrop, the background to what we are doing is to kind of realize what is also historically happening in pharmaceutical granulation. There has been some level of changes occurring, and some of them profound, great influence on the field. Everyone would recount that moving from a slow speed, low shear granulator or a planetary mixer to a RMG, a high shear granulator, was a profound change in terms of granulation speeds, capacities, and so forth. And so is moving from tray drying to fluid bed drying, conventional coating pans to perforated coating pans. And these were adopted by the industry quite rapidly. There was a lot of science behind it, a lot of force in adoption because it impacted both quality and productivity. So clearly we understand the dynamics of how new processes or new technologies gets introduced and how hungry or well accepted these are in the industry at large. Now, we also take stock of the fact that, and this is specific to tablet. Now, some of this is common to tablet making and capsule preparation, but looking at it from the point of view of a large oral solid process chain, so you would see that it is a mixture of what we can think of as batch process and continuous process. So today, we'll spend a brief amount of time, not too much, but some amount of time trying to distinguish a batch and a continuous process. This has been on the radar of many regulators of late, and we hear, one hears the term moving from batch to continuous manufacturing and so forth. And while we consider moving from batch manufacturing to continuous manufacturing, we'd like to highlight the difference between a batch process and a continuous process. Already, the industry uses a number of continuous process, but can a critical set of process, granulation and drying, become a continuous process? And that is what we are going to talk about here. And there is a lot of movement, forward movement, a lot of push as one would consider from the regulator. In fact, Dr. Janet Woodcock says this very strongly, that current manufacturing practices, which is what we just saw, would have to change in the next 25 years for cleaner, flexible, and more efficient manufacturing. And GSK, as a pharmaceutical company, is, along with many others, talking about adopting, not just trying out, but actually putting forth detailed plans of adopting these continuous technologies. And we have had the good fortune of working on the food side as well. So clearly, continuous process and continuous process-based manufacturing is taking a lot of attention in the minds of people. Why is it so? And that is the question we want to understand from the science point of view. So if one examines the current situation with batch processing, I use the same source where the quote from Ralph Emerson was, the Handbook of Pharmaceutical Granulation Technology, an excellent book that kind of captures all of the true essence, the science behind pharmaceutical granulation. Here we are looking at a let me see how I can use some annotation here. So here we are with a starting point, which is the input material, where we have powder, very fine, could be 30 microns, 50 microns range, fine powder distributed in a certain way. And at the end of the process, through which a lot of different things happen, we get a distribution that was desired. So the conversion occurs through various stages, which is found here. And this is what the granulator does. But if you were to map it over time and under different conditions of the granulator, particularly the impeller speed, one gets a very interesting graph. One sees that at a given impeller speed, for instance, you can get this type of a graph where over time, the granule size is varying in this manner. So I would like to ask the question, what would occur if you were to continue this process? Would it now stabilize? Oh, that is great then, because the level of operator dependence is reduced because the process is approaching some level of stability. So whenever we stop, it is going to, as shown here, have the same kind of a stability. That occurs very rarely. Most of the time, the process is on a different profile. So it's all, becoming over-granulated, or it's becoming a fine powder. And if this is the case, then operator dependence becomes very, very critical, because when the process needs to be stopped, somebody has to know when to stop it. What if you can control a process along this axis? Along this axis meaning, what if you start from wherever you are, from this granule, you want to get there, but this is the path along the length of the machine, not over the time frame, but over the length of the machine, this occurs. Continuous process allows that. So it's a completely different way of looking at processing. And this is why it is gaining a lot of traction. It offers control. It allows us to deal with processes that are not running into a steady state at all from a batch perspective. From a continuous perspective, the dynamic steady state is an altogether different meaning. So this is something that we'll deal with very, very quickly here during the rest of the session. At this point of time, I believe, if I remember right, we are ready for our first polling question. So we move to that aspect of the...
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Babu, till now. So, dear participants, as we see Dr. Babu speaking on the earlier side with respect to over-granulation or less granulation, we have a question for you on this, which talks about what are the major challenges you face during the granulation process. It's a multiple choice. The choices are multiple processing steps, higher processing time, sensitivity of the API leading to degradations. So I request all the participants to please provide their inputs. So we have 30 seconds of time. So we request the participants to please provide your inputs here. We have 5 more seconds. Thank you, participants, for sharing your inputs. Now let's see what's the inputs been there. So let's share the results of the polling session. Wow, what we see here is that the major challenges faced by the pharmaceutical industry during granulation is on multiple processing steps, which has almost 66% of people say that. Around 24% says about higher processing time. This is where the integrals comes into picture, which can address these issues. Let's go back to Dr. Babu and hear more on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. So we discussed why continuous process is being adopted or being recommended. And we will, at the end of this session, also cover this small difference between, or the actual difference between, continuous process and continuous manufacturing. So as a continuous process, while adopting a granulation continuous process, which is available in the industry today as an offering, one finds certain characteristics. Now, as a, let us imagine as a user, I might live with these characteristics, or I might actually find them beneficial. So I'm not commenting on these characteristics in that manner. I'm not judging them. But clearly, the current continuous twin screw granulators have certain aspects to them, which I want to talk about. Unlike an RMG, the current generation of twin screw granulators using 20th century processors create a bi or a trimodal distribution. It's very, very hard to create a nice unimodal distribution like we normally get in a RMG. The second aspect is the granule shapes are not well formed, symmetric, spherical granules. They are rod-like, dense kind of granules. And last but not the least, whatever changes are made to the process requires long settling down time or a response time, and many of them are not self-regulating and tends to have kind of a runaway effect. So these meaning it tends to overgranulate. So these are the aspects that most users of current generation of 20th century continuous twin screw granulators face. Now, why is this? Why is the current 20th century twin screws having this particular aspect? If you look at the geometry, it is, as one can imagine, whether it's a batch process or a continuous process, one can imagine that it's everything to do with the movement of particles. It would be hard for me to show you movement of particles in solid form. So you can visualize these movement of particles in a viscous medium so that it's easier to see how these particles might move. And what one would notice in these videos is the 20th century processors come to some kind of a pinch point and therefore result in a lot of hotspots, unlike what we'll be presenting to you today, the fractional lobe processor. Also, the bilobe based processors of the 20th century, based on design, suffer from a lot of dead zones where accumulation of material occurs, as opposed to the new generation of fractional lobe processors, where the material is kept in motion. It's really the movement of material and the way these materials are worked upon will create the formation of the granules, as one can imagine. So as a result, if you see this, the 20th century versus the 21st century processors, and therefore the integral granulator itself, the actual working elements of the integral granulator, which we could call as the CPU of the granulator, would be the difference. The actions, the nature of work that is done by the FLP in the granulator is completely different. And therefore, we get a a set of unique process capability enhancements. In the boiler processor, there's massive pressure peak and shear peak, which results in very low control of the operation, and that's removed here. There's greater uniformity of 3 different effects which cause granule formation: shear, kneading, and stirring. And the uniformity of this results in good or excellent process dynamics. Disturbances of any kind and the response to those disturbances gives us the state of control. The moment the disturbance is removed, are we getting back to the state of control, is a very significant thing. If it's not, it leads to undesirable events. But even at very high throughput rates, we have shown repeatedly that there is a built-in state of control and undesirable events are averted. There is, as a result, a documented process capability increase of 10-folds to 50-folds. We can show whether it's in throughput rate or residence time, there is either a massive increase in throughput or a huge reduction in residence time in the process, in the granulator. And that makes it extremely suitable for processing of sensitive API. And getting many processes in one, namely granulation, drying, and sizing, and combining them all together significantly enhances drug development. We were pleased and very thrilled that after the AAPS show in San Diego in 2017, specifically pharma manufacturing made a specific point to note, although we are not a domestic player as such in the American arena, they made a very specific note to say why our fractional low processor has these unique attributes. And this is verbatim what is appearing in their website. And they made a note of so many specific attributes of what even FDA talks about: process dynamics and residence time, distribution analysis, and so forth. So they have given a lot of importance to what we are doing with the FLP here. With that background on the FLP, which is the CPU of the granulator, I would like to move forward and present to you, introduce to you the all-in-one versatile granulator. Like I said, it does granulation, drying, and sizing in a smooth one-step process, and we have deployed them in both wet, melt, and moisture activated granulation. Let's get started with that. As we recount and what we did with the batch versus continuous, the 20th century processor versus 21st century, if we were to just take one quick look at limitation of equipment which is used to do granulation. There is a granulation equipment, there is a drying equipment, there is a sizing equipment, and these are connected by automatic transfer systems using PAT. These process analytic tools are actually used for a completely different reason. One, imagine a process tool would be expected to validate the process, but it actually validates the product coming out. The output material, the in-process material, is being monitored and quality controlled. And the process itself has to be constantly adjusted in feedback and feed forward based on so-called PAT. But the PAT is actually in-process control, in-process control of material that is being produced by inline testing or at-line testing and so forth. So these systems tend to be very inflexible to formulation development. And even today, as we speak, 20 years of continuous manufacturing and so forth, the scale at which these are available tend to be not so easy to work with. they're not available in scales that would be conducive for programs. So I want to go over some key issues on control, which allows for the integral, which uses the FLP to be the viable alternative, and why we are able to do drying and sizing at the same time. So in a typical BLP or a BILO processor-based 20th century-based twin screw granulator, you would see a very remarkable morphology. They're extruded granules. They're actually rod-like granules. And when you see the response of these to various process conditions, you would see that the dramatic change in the characteristics, and that is why process analytics is getting kind of, I would use the word even hijacked into product characterization. So you have to necessarily put a malware, or you have to put an NIR probe or what have you to be able to characterize the output, because there is very, very little control by keeping track of the process itself. There's sudden change, profound change happening in the characteristics of what is being produced. But if those granule characteristics don't change across a very large range of feed rates or speeds of the equipment or whatnot, then we have a much better machine. And the process analytics can be truly used to monitor and control the process itself, because the product, is going to be valid with over a wide process window. So just totally focused on process alone is not going to help us to adopt technology, because ultimately the drug product, the drug characteristics, what is important, and we recognize that, no matter how superior the process is, what matters is, is the in-process material good, and how good is it? So we realize porosity is a very important control knob to, to work with post-granulation, whatever properties are required in the dissolution, and so on and so forth. Indu will, of course, provide a lot more case studies there. So if you look at the porosity parameters here, I'd like to draw your attention to, again, this aspect of, right here, I'm going to draw around this median pore diameter, which is, a way in which we can determine how the pores are changing over the granule itself. So if you were to calculate the average pore diameter using the volume and the area, you would notice that, because there's so much more surface area in these pores, the average pore diameter is much, much larger in the FLP granules. And it's also confirmed once more by the fact that there is an increase in apparent skeletal density for almost the same bulk density. At the same bulk density, a much higher skeletal density shows that indeed there is quite a bit of nice pores, compressible granules that are capable of providing hard, rapidly dissolving granules. So we have seen this in different case studies, and of course in the future we'll share this with you. So we recognize that the one aspect of the process control is important, but the other aspect, that the granules themselves that are formed have to satisfy certain key requirements, key product requirements. With that in mind, going back to what the processor does, the process system does, we could start with feeding, which means dosing itself is automatic. There's no need to have a dispensing system, manual, and errors in there. The entire dispensing process happens automatically, gets blended, and then when it enters, gets granulated, dried, and sized, all at once and even precondition so that what comes out can directly go into the bag. And that is what we're proud to present to the industry. We have such a system. We have a beautiful system which can dispense and get it all the way up to the preconditioner. This shows the integral itself. There are other systems part of it. One can see the gravimetric feeder in this, but downstream to this system sits a few further devices that can condition the granules, what comes out, and ready to get it bagged. So again, so at this juncture, as we have demonstrated this, we would be happy to take this further with all of you, and that is the reason for offering this webinar at this point. You would be quite intrigued as to then, hey, if it can do all this, which is simultaneous granulation, drying, and sizing, or simultaneous granulation, cooling, and sizing, that's great. But at what capacities can it do? And what is on offer, and so forth. So I would like to share this. The Integraal MP2 was a device that we took to Rutgers University for development. So we put a couple of PhDs on the job to fully characterize the MP2, and it works all the way up to 2 kilo per hour. The Integraal Alpha is the one that is sitting in STEERLife facility and being extensively looked at for characterization. The Gamma is the one that we have commercialized recently, so we are happy to share that with you. We have under various stages of development, the Beta and the Gamma 2. The Gamma 1 is also a device that we have tested at full capacity. Over to Vijay for the second polling question at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Babu. As we see from the earlier slide what we presented, where Integraal can perform various types of granulation, either it's a wet or a melt granulation. So we have a polling questions for you, which is regarding this. So I'm just going to be launching these questions, so please provide your inputs here. The question is, which potential area would you apply to unscrew granulator for? Either it's melt granulation, wet granulation, or moisture activated granulation. Please provide your inputs. So we have 30 seconds of time for this question. So we have 5 more seconds to go. Thank you, participants, for giving your valuable inputs. Let's now see the results of the polling. Can you share the polling results? So these are the results what we get. 47% would like to use Integraal for melt granulation. 32% would like to go for wet granulation. And there are around 20% who like to go for moisture activated granulation. So as we know, Integraal is having a capability to do all 3 types of granulation, but the participants' requirements are all in 3 areas. That is the benefit where we can use Integraal for all 3 areas. I would like to also emphasize the participants, when you bring your cursor down to your screen, you will see a pop-up of a screen where you have Q&A option which has been there. We request all the participants, if you have any questions, so please submit your questions by clicking the Q&A link there. Thanks for your inputs on the polls. Let's continue with Dr. Babu's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. And I better speed up a little bit. I originally allotted about 15 minutes for this particular, section of the presentation, but I'm going to do it in about 7 minutes or so to stay in the time range that you had originally scheduled for this discussion. So I'm not going to elaborate. I would be very happy to do this offline, gentlemen and ladies who are in the audience. So each of this are very important attributes. What is quality by design and why Integraal satisfies that in terms of the process window. Why is the product quality superior? We just did go through it a little bit. What is the meaning of endpoint determination? Why is it continuous? And some of them are obvious, some of them are not. So we would be very happy to review each of these points and how they are important from adopting a continuous process technology in terms of maximizing yield, minimizing any kind of waste generation, and so on and so forth. So each of this, and most important is the temporal and spatial control, which we talked about in the batch processing. How can we control the movement of these materials in space and time? So to summarize again, what we see as the capability, which can be exploited in terms of quality, capabilities of the Integraal as pertaining to the quality of the granules are these aspects. The improved symmetry, the better flow friability of the granules, meaning less friable granules, increased pores, better control over weight uniformity and friability. So this offers an opportunity to even have very high drug load. And another slide just kind of, providing this information in a condensed form. For some of you might want to take this to various other parts of your organization. There may be plant people, there may be other purchase people, and each one would have their own perspective of how they would deploy this into their consideration. So we did prepare a few slides to share with you so that you can use it appropriately in your forum. So we would like to achieve what we believe is an adoption of this technology at your end. Again, to summarize the advantages, as we did in one of the videos that you might have seen, the combining of the various different unit operations, the granulation step, the drying step, and the sizing step into one unit greatly reduces the manufacturing footprint. We can show, and we have case studies on how much of energy is reduced, because the drying is pretty energy inefficient, but this is a lot different way of drying, and cleaning, various other types of facilities. You can imagine in a batch process controlling the dynamics of a 500-liter vessel where everything is managed in less than a liter in a continuous flow. So the concept of waste management itself is very different and quite beneficial. And these are again known things that is summarized one more time: the reduction in unit operations, reduction in number of quality control tests, speeds up processing for sure. Like we said, the Integraal has been at Rutgers for nearly 2.5 years now, used by students, PhD students, to characterize them. The Rutgers Association is one of the associations STEERLife has. We have a very deep association with other places in formulation development. But what is noteworthy with Rutgers is Dr. Musier. Professor Musier has been the brain behind a lot of CM installation, and he trains FDA on it, and his ability to provide important aspects to the process is what we would transfer to the industry, through our associations. So we have the benefit of working with the people who are already part of major change in the industry. This is a thing that I hope will connect with most of you. I do believe that some of you in the attendee, in the audience, would be coming from various walks, various parts of the industry. But to just kind of help with what the Integraal does, how does it fit with not just preparing formulations, but really in aiding continuous manufacturing. Professor Musio believes that number one on that list here, the first row, is a major important advantage, because most continuous manufacturing operations would like to just blend and compress. Don't do anything else, just blend and compress. So if the API source can make the API either directly compressible or continuous manufacturing grade or a pre-formulated ingredient, then the adoption of continuous manufacturing as such would speed up in the industry. So the conversion of drug substances into ingredients of forms like PFIs is what the first two rows say. One, specifically to make it compressible, ready to compress forms, and the second one in terms of change in structure. What is true with drug substances is also true with excipients, and excipients even become special because it's not just directly compressible excipients, but co-processing excipients to introduce functionalities that are not possible as individual units, which is another very big feature of what we see happening with the excipient technology. One of the key things that we have done ourselves is to create zero order release in excipients. Moving further down, today with a lot of interest and importance given to cancer drugs and hormones, steroids. So these high potent compounds, which are hazardous even at very, and it's so very important to deal with them in a manner that allows for containment, and this device facilitates that. Finally, and interestingly, the equipment offers drug development for both brands and generics to take the steps of development from gram scale to ton scale through various levels very, very easily. And I would like to also share some thoughts on this in the following slide. So for instance, if a user were to, let us imagine, deal with NCE, and they would then start with an Integraal MP2. But if somebody want to do a generic equivalent, they would start with an Integraal Gamma. And as you can see, either 100 grams per hour granulator or a 30 kilograms per hour granulator easily works at various levels and cuts down any time that is needed for going through scale up and various other time-taking processes at all. So for instance, 5 kilos can be produced in just 15 minutes, which is optimized granule. So start with the blend, come out with a granule in just 15 minutes and ready to check. So these are all the wonderful opportunities that is available, and the same process then can go into 5 tons of production for an engineering batch or a exhibit batch in double quick time too. So these are very versatile and flexible machines are capable of taking a process forward quickly in that manner. Vijay, over to you for the last polling question.
Thank you, Dr. Babu. Having now Dr. Babu introducing the Integraal, the twin screw granulation technology, our next question is going to be on this, which will ask more with respect to the interest of the participants. So the polling question is, would you be interested in trying the Integraal placed at our STEERLife Bangalore facility? So we would like the participants, so please provide your inputs on this, where the options are very interested, moderately interested, currently not interested. So when we say currently not interested, probably you may not be having a project right now, but in future you may be having any projects. So considering this, like, we would like to get your inputs. Last few seconds for you to answer this question. Thank you. Let's have the results being shared. So 50% of the participants are very interested in trying out Integraal. So we have a facility in Bangalore where we have a pilot scale and a lab scale Integraal at your site, where you can bring your material, we can take certain trials based on your material property, we can just work it out with you. So we have a lab here where we can even do some development activities for your products. So thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Babu.
Well, thank you, Vijay, and thank you, attendees, for showing the level of interest that you did. I have just a few more slides to close and maybe take a few questions from you. When we move across equipment sizes, the continuous process equipment such as Integraal becomes friendly because there are quite a few scale independent factors. So we have to conserve some things, unlike batch process equipments where a lot of factors are completely dependent on the vessel. So because of so many scale independent factors, it does get easier to move across equipment size too if there is a need that arises. And STEERLife scientists continuously put effort in scaling from an MP2 to an alpha to a gamma and so forth. So we recognize that FDA guidance on continuous manufacturing involves moving from one unit operation to another unit operation. That is where the guideline is actually present, whether it's real-time release testing and so forth. So from a B to an A, that is where the current guidelines remain. That is continuous manufacture. Can you automate the transfer from B to A to T to C to H? So these are all different unit operations. They are all sitting somewhere else, but without having to worry about qualification, can you move? Continuous process that we are interested in will greatly help adopting continuous manufacturing because the product that has come out would always be qualified. So we'll talk about this more and more, that why continuous processing and true continuous processing is a stepping stone to continuous manufacturing. The important thing to realize is Integraal can be totally deployed into a batch manufacturing environment. So it's really A, T, and C are combined into one step. So B and H remain. So the continuous process lends itself to both to a batch manufacturer and a continuous manufacturer, although it becomes a great stepping stone to move to a continuous manufacturing, taking from quality by testing to quality by design. And like our chairman would love to say this, it's really time to change. And we would like to work with you and make you trailblazers. Thank you for your time, and for further information, Dr. Vijay Kulkarni is available at STEERLife at vijay.kulkarni@steerlife.com. Over to you, Vijay, for some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babu. It was a nice presentation on the novel topic of twin screw granulation. On behalf of STEERLife, I thank all the participants who have attended this webinar. Just to make a point that this is a webinar series. So this was the first topic which we covered today. We still have 2 more sessions coming up in terms of a webinar, and 2 webinars would be talking on the technical aspects and the case studies. Will be the second seminar. We'll announce the dates and send the email accordingly. There will be a final webinar which will talk more on the regulatory perspective and the commercial aspects of twin screw granulation. When I say the commercial aspects, how do you compare with the conventional process versus a twin screw granulator, how it works in a continuous way. So these are the 2 other webinars which will be being shared as a link to you. So we request all the participants to please register for these upcoming webinars.